Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a muggy May evening. My name is Colin, and it's bedtime, brother. Hey, it's me. There I am. Hello. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Brother Bedtime. Tonight we're going to be continuing on with our journey through the fourth book of the Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. My tea is too hot. I know this already. I just finished boiling it. I just really want some. It's lemongrass, chamomile, herbal, something something. I'll enjoy that in a few minutes. Hi, hello, how are you? I had a really great weekend. I got to see some friends for the first time in a very, very long time, which was really, really nice. And today even I got to reconnect with an old pal. We went for a nice little walk along the new trail that just opened up behind the old power plant, just across the Walterdale Bridge. It's nice. It's nice. That old building, the power plant, is a bit of a relic out of time. It's this colossal brick hulk of a thing, with some really interesting paint jobs on the doors. I used to hear tell of secret arts parties that used to get thrown there, but as far as I know, it's sat dormant for a very long time. It's quite the sight. And the trails were nice too. Busy, people are excited to be out and about, but by and large, people are still, as far as I could tell, respecting the social distancing things. So that was heartening to see. It's important that people are still getting their exercise and their vitamin D and all that good stuff. I hope you had a really great weekend. I hope it was restorative and refreshing. Last week's show was a lot of fun. Thanks to everybody who tuned in for that. And I'm really excited to continue our journey because things are just heating up. Last time, we read 2 chapters, the first of which featured a war council on Dancing Lawn, where we were rejoined by our dear friend Dr. Cornelius, the half-dwarf who instructed Caspian in the ways of old Narnia. AC Ethereal says, "What's going on? I missed the beginning." That's right, Ethereal. I do a little recap, and that's how we do it here on Brother Bedtime. Get everybody in the know, on the same page, so to speak. Oh God, sorry for that one. Sometimes it squeaks out. Sometimes I just can't help myself, and the dad jokes they take hold. You're welcome. Good to have you. Anyways, last week we were at the War Council where Dr. Cornelius showed up and warned them that Prince or King Miraz was on the march, and there was no time to waste. They retreated to a sacred hideout known as Aslan's How, which, as we learned, was the old where the old stone table from the second book was, where Aslan was shorn and bound and sacrificed for purposes most foul. And the stone table has since been buried over. Remember, it's been many hundreds of years since the events of that book. And they took counsel and decided to use the most valuable treasure that they had, the Horn of Gondor. Which of course belonged to Queen Susan, and calls unlikely aid from anywhere when it is blown. However, they weren't too sure where the best place to seek the aid would be. So they sent Pattertwig up to the Lantern Waste, where the children first entered and subsequently left Narnia, again in the second book. And old Nickabrick? Was it Nickabrick that they sent down to the sea to take a look at Cair Paravel? Let's see here. It was either Nickabrick or Trumpkin. It was Trumpkin, that's right. Which came as a surprise to everyone because Trumpkin was being a real curmudgeon about this whole thing. He doesn't buy into this this magic nonsense, this whole Aslan juju. Really ain't his scene. He grew up in a secular dwarven hole and will have no truck with this fantastic nonsense. Nevertheless, he agreed to go on a journey. And it appears that this was the very same dwarf that was captured and was going to be drowned and was subsequently saved by Queen Susan with her recently reacquired archery kit. Sam with Bells On says, "We'll have to call you Father Bedtime soon because of the dad jokes, eh? Eh? Yeah, you got it. You got it, Sam. Nailed it." And so, unless anybody else has any prying questions or desperate burning concerns, we will bravely soldier on. to Chapter 8. How they left the island. "And so," said Trumpkin, for, as you have realized, it was he who had been telling all this story to the 4 children, sitting on the grass in the ruined hall of Cair Paravel. "And so, I put a crust or 2 in my pocket, left behind all weapons but my dagger, and took to the woods in the grey of the morning. I'd been plugging away for many hours when there came a sound that I'd never heard the like of in my born days. I won't forget that. The whole air was full of it, loud as thunder, but far longer, cool and sweet as music over water, but strong enough to shake the woods. And I said to myself, if that's not the horn, call me a rabbit. And a moment later I wondered why he hadn't blown it sooner." "What time was it?" asked Edmund. "Just between 9 and 10 of the clock," said Trumpkin. "Just when we were at the railway station," said all the children, and looked at one another with shining eyes. "Please go on," said Lucy to the dwarf. "Well, as I was saying, I wondered, but I went on as hard as I could pelt. I kept on all night, and then, when it was half light this morning, as if I'd no more sense than a giant, I risked a shortcut across open country to cut off a big loop of the river, and was caught. Not by the army, but by a pompous old fool who had charge of a little castle, which is Miraz's last stronghold toward the coast. I needn't tell you that they got no true tale of me, but I was a dwarf, and that was enough. But lobsters and lollipops! It is a good thing the seneschal was a pompous fool. Anyone else would have run me through there and then, but nothing would do for him short of a grand execution, sending me down to the ghosts in a full ceremonial way. And then this young lady," he nodded at Susan, "does her bit of archery, and it was pretty good shooting, let me tell you. And here we are. And without my army, for of course they took that." He knocked out and refilled his pipe. "Ooh, all that story over one pipe. Good golly, it must be a slow smoke." "Great Scott!" said Peter. "Not by Jove, Peter, you're changing your tune." "Great Scott!" said Peter. "So it was the horn, your own horn, Sue, that dragged us all off that seat on the platform yesterday morning. I can hardly believe it, yet it all fits in." "I don't know why you shouldn't believe it," said Lucy. "If you believe in magic at all, aren't there lots of stories about magic forcing people out of one place, out of one world, into another? I mean, when a magician in the Arabian Nights calls up a djinn, it has to come. We had to come, just like that." "Yes," said Peter. "I suppose what makes it feel so queer is that in the stories, it's always someone in our world who does the calling. One doesn't really think about where the djinn's coming from." "And now we know what it feels like for the djinn," said Edmund with a chuckle. "Golly, it's a bit uncomfortable to know that we can be whistled for like that. It's worse than what Father says about living at the mercy of the telephone." "But we want to be here, don't we?" said Lucy. "If Aslan wants us?" "Meanwhile," said the dwarf, "what are we to do? I suppose I'd better go back to King Caspian and tell him no help has come."
"No help," said Susan. "But it has worked, and here we are."
Yes, to be sure. I see that," said the dwarf, whose pipe seemed to be blocked. At any rate, he made himself very busy cleaning it. "But, well, I mean—"
"But don't you yet see who we are?" shouted Lucy. "You are stupid."
Ooh, savage words from the youngest Pevensey. Just Mom says she watched the whole Prince Caspian movie last night, and it was 5 O's worth of good. Wow, that sounds like a good movie. "I suppose you are the 4 children out of the old stories," said Trumpkin, "and I'm very glad to meet you, of course, and it's very interesting, no doubt, but, no offense," and he hesitated again, Do get on and say whatever you're going to say, said Edmund. Well then, no offense, said Trumpkin. But, you know, the king and Truffle Hunter and Dr. Cornelius were expecting, well, if you see what I mean, help. To put it in another way, I think they'd been imagining you as great warriors. As it is, we're awfully fond of children and all that, but just at the moment, in the middle of a war. But I'm sure you understand. You mean you think we're no good, said Edmund, getting red in the face. Now pray don't be offended, interrupted the dwarf. I assure you, my dear little friends. Little from you is really a bit too much, said Edmund, jumping up. I suppose you don't believe we won the Battle of Baruna. Well, you can say what you like about me, because I know... There's no good losing our tempers now, said Peter. Let's fit him out with fresh armor and fit ourselves out from the treasure chamber, and have a talk after that. I don't quite see the point, began Edmund, but Lucy whispered in his ear, Hadn't we better do what Peter says? He is the High King, you know, and I think he has an idea. So Edmund agreed, and by the aid of his torch, they all, including Trumpkin, went down the steps again into the dark coldness and dusty splendor of the treasure house. The dwarf's eyes glistened as he saw the wealth that lay on the shelves, though he had to stand on tiptoes to do so, and he muttered to himself, It would never do to let Knickerbrick see this, never. They found easily enough a mail shirt for him, a sword, a helmet, a shield, a bow and quiverful of arrows, all of dwarfish size. The helmet was of copper, set with rubies, and there was gold on the hilt of the sword. Trumpkin had never seen, much less carried, so much wealth in all his life. The children also put on mail shirts and helmets. A sword and shield were found for Edmund, and a bow for Lucy. Peter and Susan were of course already carrying their gifts. As they came back up the stairway, jingling in their mail, and already looking and feeling more like Narnians and less like school children, the two boys were behind, apparently making some plan. Lucy heard Edmund say, No, let me do it. It will be more of a sucks for him if I win, and less of a letdown for all of us if I fail. All right, Ed, said Peter. When they came out into the daylight, Edmund turned to the dwarf very politely and said, I've got something to ask you. Kids like us don't often have the chance of meeting a great warrior like you. Would you have a little fencing match with me? It would be frightfully decent. But lad, said Trumpkin, these swords are sharp. I know, said Edmund, but I'll never get anywhere near you, and you'll be quite clever enough to disarm me without doing me any damage. It's a dangerous game, said Trumpkin, but since you make such a point of it, I'll try a pass or two. Marin Shea says, storyboarding a short film, but mostly playing Animal Crossing. Oh, yeah, reading and baking. Dang, sounds like y'all are keeping busy in the best possible ways. Both swords were out in a moment, and the three others jumped off the dais and stood watching. It was well worth it. It was not like the silly fighting you see with broadswords on the stage. It was not even like the rapier fighting which you see sometimes done rather better. This was real broadsword fighting. The great thing is to slash at your enemy's legs and feet, because they are the part that have no armor. And when he slashes at yours, you jump with both feet off the ground so that his blow goes under them. This gave the dwarf an advantage, because Edmund, being much taller, had to be always stooping. I don't think Edmund would have had a chance if he had fought Trumpkin 24 hours earlier. But the heir of Narnia had been working upon him ever since they arrived on the island, and all his old battles came back to him, and his arms and fingers remembered their old skill. He was King Edmund once more. Round and round the two combatants circled. Stroke after stroke they gave, and Susan, who never could learn to like this sort of thing, shouted out, "Oh, do be careful!" And then, so quickly that no one, unless they knew as Peter did, could quite see how it happened, Edmund flashed his sword round with a peculiar twist. The dwarf's sword flew out of his grip, and Trumpkin was wringing his empty hand as you do after a sting from a cricket bat. "Not hurt, I hope, my dear little fellow," said Edmund, panting a little and returning his own sword to its sheath.
"I see the point," said Trumpkin dryly. "You know a trick I never learned."
"That's quite true," put in Peter. "The best swordsman in the world may be disarmed by a trick that's new to him. I think it's only fair to give Trumpkin a chance at something else. Will you have a shooting match with my sister? There are no tricks in archery, you know."
"Ah, you're jokers, are you?" said the dwarf. "I begin to see. As if I didn't know how she can shoot after what happened this morning. All the same, I'll give it a try."
He spoke gruffly, but his eyes brightened, for he was a famous bowman among his people. Here we can see, on the previous page, Trumpkin getting absolutely disgraced by King Edmund, returned to full form. Parry, thrust, bolest lust, riposte, etc. You can't quite see it because the focus won't kick in, but Trumpkin is looking rather out of sorts in this particular little picture. There he is. Look at that, the pigeon-toed little guy. "Oh no, I got disarmed, it totally blows." All 5 of them came out into the courtyard. "What's to be the target?" asked Peter. "I think that apple hanging over the wall on the branch there would do," said Susan.
"That'll do nicely, lass," said Trumpkin. "You mean the yellow one near the middle of the arch?"
"No, not that one," said Susan. "The red one up above, over the battlement."
The dwarf's face fell. "Looks more like a cherry than an apple," he muttered, but he said nothing out loud.
They tossed up for first shot, greatly to the interest of Trumpkin, who had never seen a coin tossed before, and Susan lost. They were to shoot from the top of the steps that led from the hall into the courtyard. Everyone could see from the way the dwarf took his position and handled his bow that he knew what he was about. Twang went the string. It was an excellent shot. The tiny apple shook as the arrow passed, and a leaf came fluttering down. Then Susan went to the top of the steps and strung her bow. She was not enjoying her match half so much as Edmund had enjoyed his, not because she had any doubt about hitting the apple, but because Susan was so tender-hearted that she almost hated to beat someone who had been beaten already. The dwarf watched her keenly as she drew the shaft to her ear. A moment later, with a soft little thump which they could all hear in that quiet place, the apple fell to the grass with Susan's arrow in it. Here we can see the apple being sniped by our dear, tender-hearted Susan, who just can't bear to beat somebody who's just been beaten. She could stand to take a page out of Khalil Gibran's work. Limp not before the lame, deeming it kindness. Yum. "Oh, well done, Sue," shouted the other children. "It wasn't really any better than yours," said Susan to the dwarf. "I think there was a tiny breath of wind as you shot."
"No, there wasn't," said Trumpkin. "Don't tell me. I know when I am fairly beaten. I won't even say that the scar of my last wound catches me a bit when I get my arm well back."
"Oh, are you wounded?" asked Lucy. "Do let me look."
"It's not a sight for little girls,"
began Trumpkin, but then he suddenly checked himself.
"There I go, talking like a fool again," he said. "I suppose you're as likely to be a great surgeon as your brother was to be a great swordsman, or your sister to be a great archer." He sat down on the steps and took off his hauberk and slipped down his little shirt, showing an arm hairy and muscular in proportion as a sailor's, though not much bigger than a child's. There was a clumsy bandage on the shoulder, which Lucy proceeded to unroll.
Underneath, the cut looked very nasty, and there was a good deal of swelling.
"Oh, poor Trumpkin," said Lucy. "How horrid!"
Then she carefully dripped onto it one single drop of the cordial from her flask.
"Hullo, eh? What have you done?"
said Trumpkin. But however he turned his head and squinted and whisked his beard to and fro, he couldn't quite see his own shoulder. Then he felt it as well as he could, getting his arms and fingers into very difficult positions as you do when you're trying to scratch a place that is just out of reach. Then he swung his arm and raised it and tried the muscles, and finally jumped to his feet, crying,
"Giants and junipers! It's cured! It's good as new!"
After that, he burst into a great laugh and said,
"Ha ha ha! Well, I've been made as big a fool of myself as a dwarf ever did. No offense, I hope. My humble duty to your majesties all, humble duty. And thanks for my life, my cure, my breakfast, and my lesson."
The children all said it was quite all right, and not to mention it. Those are some very fine English manners. Accent. Just made my night. Say vodka.
Vodka. Little water. Very strong medicine.
Just Mom says Peter Dinklage played the dwarf. Oh, in the Caspian movie. Cool. Yeah, he's got the market cornered as far as famous little people go, and he's a wonderful actor too.
Vodka.
"And now," said Peter, "if you've really decided to believe in us—"
"I have,"
said the dwarf. "It's quite clear what we have to do. We must join King Caspian at once."
"The sooner the better," said Trumpkin. "My being such a fool has already wasted about an hour."
"It's about 2 days' journey the way you came," said Peter. "For us, I mean. We can't walk all day and night like you dwarves." Then he turned to the others. "What Trumpkin calls Aslan's How is obviously the stone table itself. You remember it was about a half-day's march, or a little less, from there down to the fords of Baruna."
"Baruna's Bridge, we call it,"
said Trumpkin. "There was no bridge in our time," said Peter. "And then, from Baruna down to here, was another day and a bit. We used to get home about tea-time on the second day, going easily. Going hard, we could probably do the whole thing in a day and a half, perhaps."
"But remember, it's all woods now," said Trumpkin, "and there are enemies to dodge."
"Look here," said Edmund, "need we go by the same way that our dear little friend came?"
"No more of that, your majesty, if you love me,"
said the dwarf. "Very well," said Edmund. "May I say our DLF?" Oh, savage burn. Our DLF, Trumpkin, very red-faced indeed, I'm sure. "Oh, Edmund," said Susan, "don't keep on at him like that."
"That's all right, lass. I mean, your majesty," said Trumpkin with a chuckle. "A jibe won't raise a blister."
And after that, they often called him the DLF, till they'd almost forgotten what it meant. "As I was saying," continued Edmund, "we needn't go that way. Why shouldn't we row a little south till we come to Glasswater Creek and row up it? That brings us up behind the hill of the stone table, and we'll be safe while we're at sea. If we start at once, we can be at the head of Glasswater before dark, get a few hours' sleep, and be with Caspian pretty early tomorrow."
"What a thing it is to know the coast," said Trumpkin. "None of us knows anything about Glasswater."
"What about food?" said Susan. "Oh, we'll have to do with apples," said Lucy. "Do let's get on. We've done nothing yet, and we've been here nearly 2 days." "And anyway, no one's going to have my hat for a fish basket again," said Edmund. They used one of the raincoats as a kind of bag, and put a good many apples in it. Then they all had a good long drink at the well, for they would meet no more fresh water till they landed at the head of the creek, and went down to the boat. The children were sorry to leave Cair Paravel, which, even in ruins, had begun to feel like home again. "The DLF had better steer," said Peter, "and Ed and I will take an oar each. Half a moment, though, we'd better take off our mail. We're going to be pretty warm before we're done." The girls had better be in the bows and shout directions to the DLF because he doesn't know the way. You'd better get us a fair way out to sea before we've passed the island." And soon the green, wooded coast of the island was falling away behind them, and its little bays and headlands were beginning to look flatter, and the boat was rising and falling in the gentle swell. The sea began to grow bigger around them, and, in the distance, bluer, but close round the boat it was green and bubbly. Everything smelled salt, and there was no noise except the swishing of water and the clop-clop of water against the sides, and the splash of the oars and the jolting noise of the rowlocks. The sun grew hot. It was delightful for Lucy and Susan in the bows, bending over the edge and trying to get their hands in the sea, which they could never quite reach. The bottom, mostly pure, pale sand, but with occasional patches of purple seaweed, could be seen beneath them. "It's like old times," said Lucy. "Do you remember our voyage to Terebinthia, and Galma, and 7 Islands, and the Lone Islands?" Hold up a second. Can anyone confirm or deny that Bridge to Terebinthia is another book, or is that Terabithia? Because I had no idea those two were connected. That's not by C.S. Lewis, is it? Terabithia. Yeah, this one is Terebinthia. A line runs through it, I'm sure. "Do you remember our voyage to Terebinthia and Galma and 7 Isles and the Lone Islands?" "Yes," said Susan, "and our great ship, the Splendor Hyaline, with the swan's head at her prow and the carved swan's wings coming back almost to her waist, and the silken sails and the great stern lanterns, and the feasts on the poop, and the musicians. Do you remember when we had the musicians up in the rigging playing flutes so that it sounded like music out of the sky?" Geez, I don't think anyone could ever forget a good feast on the poop. Presently, Susan took over Edmund's oar, and he came forward to join Lucy. They had passed the island now, and stood closer in to the shore, all wooded and deserted. They would have thought it very pretty, if they had not remembered the time when it was open and breezy and full of merry friends. "Phew, this is pretty grueling work," said Peter. "Can't I row for a bit?" said Lucy. "The oars are too big for you," said Peter shortly, not because he was cross, but because he had no strength to spare for talking. "No, go back to giving directions, Lucy. Nice try, kid. Maybe when you're older." And that is the end of our story for tonight. Gracious. Finally, we've caught up to the present. This is great. So all of that stuff that we've heard about with Prince Caspian is the relatively recent past. And now that we've caught up to the present, we're bound to have some action soon. I anticipate some grand battle in the next day or two here, as well as a reunion of sorts. I'm excited to get back to Wimbleweather, see if he's recovered from his sorry oafish mistake of leading the army into the open at the wrong time and at the wrong place. Oh, big idiots. Big idiots. I love big idiots. That went incredibly fast. Yeah, that chapter was longer than the one from Thursday. About 18 pages or so. Always it goes by too fast. Well, it's better than going by too slow. There's a very fine line between, oh, it's over, and oh, it's over. So, with that, my dear friends, my sweet family, compadres, compatriots, cohorts, colleagues, etc., I bid you all a very fond farewell on this fine spring evening. I wish you all sweet dreams and a restful repose whenever it finds you. And we'll be back again tomorrow night. Once again, don't forget, if you ever miss anything, you can check out our brand new YouTube channel by clicking on archives down below. And if you want to get in touch with me personally, you can click on contact, and that will open up an email to brotherbedtime@gmail.com. As well, if you know anybody else that might need a little bit of a pre-snooze narration in their life, feel free to invite them. Bring them on by. The more the merrier, I say. And I always enjoy seeing who's in chat. So thanks for saying hello, everybody. Thanks for chatting, and thanks for being a friend. Big idiots do make the world far more interesting, said Lance. Yeah, although there's a few big idiots out there I can imagine doing without. I'll say no more on that, though. It's unpleasant and probably bad for the Constitution this soon before bedtime. And so, my dear darling friends and fun, sweet family, to you I say, good night, moon, and good night, stars. Good night, trucks, and good night, cars. Good night, shoes, and good night, hats. Good night, dogs, and good night, cats. Good night to you and to me. Oh, I messed it up. That's okay. Good night to friends and family. Good night, everybody. Sweet dreams. Have a great sleep.